Good evening, I'm Ian Butler, and welcome to Wavelength, the show where we talk to local people about local issues in the hope of getting everybody a little bit more on the same wavelength. So today's show is about a ballot measure that's going to be on November's ballot about rent control. Pacificans are going to be weighing in on that, and there's a lot of uncertain or misconceptions that people have, and my hope is that this show will help kind of clear up some of those and give people a little bit better understanding of what that is. And so to that end, we have a couple of guests. We have Daniel Savers with us tonight, who's a senior attorney with the Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto. East Palo Alto recently, a couple of years ago, I guess, they had a rent control ordinance go through, so they've already been through it all. So he has that experience. And then we have also Thursday Roberts, who's the campaign manager of Fair Rents for Pacifica, which is the group that is advocating for this. And in a little while, we're going to have Larry Hixson, who's a tenant who's been given a large rent increase. So anyhow, I'd like to welcome Daniel and Thursday to the show. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good to have you on.
Thanks.
Yeah. I appreciate this opportunity to kind of give people the real information about what's going to be we're going to be voting on in November. So Thursday, since you are you're the person that's kind of running the campaign for Fair Rents for Pacifica, maybe you could start out by giving us an idea how this ordinance came about.
Well, so rents have been increasing all around the Bay Area. We have a housing shortage. I'm a renter in Pacifica, and I started noticing that my neighbors were getting particularly fearful. A lot of my neighbors are elderly people on fixed incomes, teachers, social workers, a mix, young couples getting started. And I could just feel their anxiety and thinking that they weren't going to be able to keep living here. The problem is there's really nowhere to go. Right. And so we started organizing. And countywide, there's been a number of groups, San Mateo, Burlingame, Mountain View's not in this county, but, and so actually a woman came over and held a forum at St. Peter's, and that was my first meeting to hear about rent stabilization, and the room was packed. And a lot of my neighbors were there, a lot of people were there, and that's when we started talking about it and started organizing to see what we could do.
And at some point along the way, you brought in Daniel Saver here.
The expert.
The expert, yeah. So you've already been through this before.
Yeah, so I am a housing attorney that practices all throughout the peninsula area. And so we both practice in a city that does have protections for renters in East Palo Alto, and then a lot of places that don't have any protections for renters. So we kind of have the perspective of like a bird's eye view to see what kind of difference these laws can make in the lives of so many of our residents in terms of being able to really help people stay in their homes.
Yeah, so what kind of difference does that make? What is the difference?
Well, it makes a huge difference. I mean, the way that I'm a lawyer, so the way I think about it is kind of what the legal framework is. And the way I think of it is in Pacifica, as in many places right now, the law on evictions and rents is essentially that tenants have next to no substantive rights. So if a landlord has a tenant who's on a month-to-month tenancy, which is most people that have been here for a while, they can raise the rent as much as they want, as often as they want, for any or for no reason whatsoever. They just have to give the tenant a written notice. Wow. And the same thing is true with evictions. You can be a tenant that's lived in your place for 20 years, you've always paid rent on time, you've always been compliant with your lease, and then all of a sudden your landlord can evict you for no reason whatsoever. They don't even have to tell you why.
So evictions can also, you can just evict any, just kick them out. So in other words, so people then that are living their lives, they have their jobs, they are living never really knowing if they have a place to stay next month or in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, in a climate like this, like Thursday was saying, with the housing crisis we have, renters are faced with this constant fear of, am I going to be able to stay here? What is my landlord going to be able to do? And the problem from a legal perspective is that the landlords can just raise the rent as much as they want or evict people for no reason whatsoever. So these sorts of laws try to take that legal system, which has a really unequal balance of power where the landlords hold nearly all of the power, to create now a more fair system where both sides have rights and responsibilities. And it's not trying to like push things too far in favor of tenants. It's really trying to equalize a little bit the positions of both sides.
Yeah, well, having been a renter myself, you never really know what's going to be coming down in the future. I know I've always kind of walked on eggshells with the landlord. Should I tell him that the refrigerator is broken? And you're afraid if he thinks you're asking for too much, he'll just kick you out.
Most people can't believe that there aren't any protections for renters. I mean, they're surprised to learn that. Even renters themselves, and they find out when they're in a pickle and try and get help and find out there isn't any.
And they realize, oh my gosh, so how do you make any plans? How do you plan your family and your job and your careers if you don't know that you can stay?
Yeah, that's the problem. And in fact, people are being ripped out of the community. I think like what Thursday was saying, in the last several years, as rents have risen and as there are more and more evictions within our communities, we're seeing large numbers of people who are really integral members of the communities that we know and love who are being forced out. And there is really nowhere that they can go. So people are being pushed farther and farther out into the Central Valley. People are leaving to other states. And so it's really tearing at the very fabric of the places that we know and love.
And I would imagine certain populations are affected more by this as well.
Certainly true. I mean, particularly look, people who are on fixed income, seniors, as Thursday said, are a very vulnerable group. People who are lower income are oftentimes hit the hardest. So it is certainly a crisis that is having disproportionate impacts on the most vulnerable members of our community.
Okay, yeah, so that's the problem.
Yeah.
So this ordinance was crafted to address this problem. So let's figure out just what is in this ordinance. What does it address?
Well, one thing about the ordinance is that compared to other ordinances in other cities, we purposefully work toward a moderate version. So the amount of increases of rent increases that are allowed is higher than I think anywhere else. And we did that on purpose, to not go too far, to not ask for too much, to be fair to landlords. So what it does is it limits rent increases to 100% of inflation.
Okay, to inflation.
Yeah. There is a mechanism, which is a rent board, where landlords can petition for higher increases for whatever they need, whatever, there's a formula and they can apply for that.
So you mean if they have extra expenses?
For fair rate of return. It limits evictions for just cause. So you have to violate your lease or be involved in criminal activity or be a nuisance or something. There needs to be a cause for people to be evicted.
Okay.
Not to get too technical, but a landlord move-in is one acceptable way. That's a way.
If the landlord wants to take that unit and just live there,
move in themselves, that's okay.
Have that option.
It's allowed. So those are basically the key components of the ordinance.
Okay. Now I know there's limits to what units can be affected by this. So that's a very important detail.
It is.
Yes.
So it's apartment buildings with 3 or more units.
Okay.
So single-family houses, no. Condos,
so Linamar
no.
Ranchers.
No.
So you folks out there that have your Linamar Ranchers that you may be renting out, you will not be affected by this at all.
No.
Okay.
Duplexes, no.
Okay.
So it's an apartment building with 3 or more units
that
this applies to. And there's about 2,200 units in Pacifica that would be affected.
Okay.
Yeah. And that, if you look at the census data of about how many people that is, you're looking at roughly, somewhere in the vicinity of 5,000 of your residents.
Out of a city of 40,000.
Yeah, so it's a substantial chunk. I mean, it's not everybody, but in terms of your renter population, it's, I believe, over 50% of the total population of renters in the city would actually be protected by this ordinance.
Okay.
So it's a large number of people who would benefit.
And I understand it also does not affect new units. So
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That is correct. Yeah. So because of a state law and because of the way this particular ordinance is crafted in order to comply with that state law, it'll only apply to units that were constructed prior to 1995. There's a particular date there.
1995.
Yeah. So you know, there's a lot of misinformation that's you know, kind of put out there in the ether about this. For example, a lot of people think that if you have these sorts of protections, it would discourage people from actually coming in and building more housing, which we oftentimes so desperately need.
Right.
But because this law wouldn't actually apply to anything that is newly constructed, it won't have that disincentive effect.
So have no effect on that whatsoever. Really.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, really,
So
what
it's
it's
a separate issue, basically.
It's a totally separate issue. I mean, what this is really about is protecting the current residents that we have in town who make this such a great place to live. Yeah. It's about helping those folks have more stability and predictability. So like you were saying at the beginning, like you just don't know. Right now, people have no idea if they're going to be able to stay. With protections like this, people are able to plan, they're able to involve themselves more in the community. And I mean, frankly, they're able to keep a roof over their head. We see homeless numbers climbing dramatically.
Homelessness is a very real problem. In Pacifica, you don't really see them, but they're there. You know, we have a couple of visible people, but hiding somewhere in the shadows, there's quite a bit of homelessness here.
Yeah, and it's been on the rise. I don't have the figures right at hand, but I know that the number of homeless individuals in the city of Pacifica has risen dramatically just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and a lot of them, I know several personally that it's specifically because their rents went up and now they're living in the car.
It's a very common consequence of that.
Well, one point is that homeowners have mortgages that they know that what their mortgage payment is going to be every month.
Right.
Prop 13 was passed largely so that people weren't pushed out of their homes because of skyrocketing real estate taxes. So that's predictable for them too. So people can age at home. They can stay in their home as long as they want to because they have predictable housing costs.
So rent stabilization is kind of like Prop 13 for renters. It's kind of, it puts them on the same footing as a homeowner as far as at least having that, being able to budget your housing expenses into the future.
That's exactly right, and I think that Thursday raised a critical point here, because ultimately, I think this measure is about a couple of key values. One is really about preserving the city of Pacifica and what makes it great. So we were talking about all the folks that live here, and we'll meet a resident here later, and Thursday herself who lives here and rents.
I'm one of them.
There you go, right? So like this is all about trying to keep the people that make this city great here so that they continue to be a part of this. And the other piece of it that I think is really important is it's ultimately about fairness. Homeowners, for very good reason, have lots of government protections that help keep their housing costs stable because we want our neighborhoods to be stabilized. And really what renters are asking for with this sort of measure is just to be treated equally with the same sort of fairness, the same sort of predictability.
All right. So I want to also talk about, I know there's going to be some degree of expense to pay for this. I mean, there's an infrastructure involved in this. So what does that cost? How is that paid? Is there a cost to the city? Because the city doesn't have money. We can't afford to pay anything.
Right. So it's not a huge amount of money, but each apartment unit would be charged a fee, and that's how it's paid for. So the apartments themselves will be paying for the expense of the rent board.
And the key takeaway here is that it would cost the city nothing out of the general fund. The way that this particular ordinance is crafted is that all of the costs associated with this new program are actually self-financed through the ordinance itself. One of the innovations of the ordinance here, as Thursday said, it's a little bit more moderate than some of the other ordinances that are out there, is that ultimately the cost of the program will be assessed through a modest fee on each apartment that will actually be paid by the renters. So essentially what folks have thought about this is it's like an insurance policy. You're going to pay like $19 a month as a renter, and for the first year it's going to be a little bit more to cover the startup costs, but once it's up and running, it's going to be $19 a month to get a guarantee that your landlord can't raise the rent a crazy amount and that they can't evict you for no reason. And I myself also am a renter. You know, I would gladly pay $19 a month to know that I can't be evicted suddenly or have my rent jacked up by $700 all at once.
Right. Well, the whole concept of insurance, there's a reason that it exists.
Exactly.
People need that sense of being insured that they will be able to function.
Yeah,
so
but
seems reasonable.
I am glad that you asked that, because that is, I think, a common misconception about these programs, is that they're going to somehow bankrupt the city. And you can just look at the language of the ordinance. I'd encourage all of your viewers out there to actually just go and look at the language itself. It's very clearly written in there that the program will be funded through this fee that's actually going to be passed to the
no way we
users.
might have a shortfall and the city has to make up the difference, or any concern like that? Or?
If that were to happen, then the city would be able to recuperate any money that it puts into the program in future years. So that amount of the fee can be adjusted if it needs to be into the future.
Right.
So it's set at a certain amount for the first year, but the city can make any adjustments that are necessary into the future. And if it does end up putting any money into the program, it'll be able to get that back if it so chooses.
Okay, that's great. So I know that we're going to be having, there's another side to this. There's the opposition. And who is the opposition in this case, and how are they funded?
So the real estate industry is very well organized and very well funded. We expect $1 million to come into this campaign in opposition.
Really?
Well, in our last city council election, the real estate industry put $63,000 or $68,000 into the race, when
it dwarfed the individual donations.
The average amount that a city council person running for city council spends is $16,000. So it really has a big impact. I think the strategy is to get people on city councils so that they're pro-development, and they're very well organized nationally, statewide, countywide. So that's the opposition.
And I think one thing I would add to that is, the housing crisis is hurting a lot of people, but some people are actually profiting off of the housing crisis. A lot of people are making money off of the pain that so many people in our community are feeling. Those groups within the real estate industry and the real estate lobby, they don't want to see their profits cut. And so they're going to throw everything that they have at this to protect their bottom line. Yeah, it's all of our rent money. Right,
exactly. It's going to fund getting our rent raised, yeah. Well, I think we're probably at a time right now where it'd be good to bring in our other guests, because we're talking about this as a kind of a theoretical thing, like, hey, what if we have our rent raised by an astronomical amount? Well, we have a guy right here, Larry Hixson, who has experienced that very thing himself. Why don't you tell us your story?
I've lived up on Talbot for 10 years now. I love Pacifica. I volunteer. I do a lot of things here in town for the high schools and some churches, giving them breads and desserts and things for the seniors. And so I would
involved in the community. You're part of this community here.
Yeah, always have been.
Yeah.
And so this year I had gotten my rent raised quite a substantial amount.
How much?
$690.
$690. Wow. So this is, how big of a unit we talking about here?
It's a one bedroom.
One bedroom went up $690. That's a lot for one bedroom.
Yeah, and there's no. Here's the dishwasher. So there's no. It's nothing fancy. It's good for me and my son. He lives with me half the time.
Did everybody get a similar rent increase to what you got?
Yes, there's 16 units in there.
16 units.
Yeah.
So who can do the math? How much? $690. How much money is this person getting off of this rent increase? That's a lot of money.
If by November she'll clear about $50,000 or so.
Just in extra money in 6 months.
In extra money, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just the extra. That's not including the total amount that would actually be made in revenue off the building, because everybody's been paying more than $690 in rent up until now.
So you also have that, and plus, you have appreciation. The value of the property is a whole separate thing.
Absolutely.
So they're doing well. So okay, so let's say that this measure passes in November. What happens to your rent then?
So if it passes in November, January, it gets rolled back to February's rent of February of 2016.
17.
27.
So it'll go back to that rate. So,
but I guess it'd be able to be raised, like 3.5%? Is that the number?
Correct.
As opposed to whatever percent,
yeah.
70, I don't know, and 50%, whatever it went up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can drive by our building there, and everybody has a little sign in the window. It'll
Oh, I'll have to see that.
yeah, it's pretty neat. We
Yeah.
all got together, and we're fighting very hard and going throughout and
So
letting
that's
everybody know that.
That's pretty stunning. So you're an example, this unit here, and I know there are many other examples as well, right?
Right. It's either a roof over my head or like you guys said, a trailer on the street. It's that much of a big deal.
So do you think if this measure doesn't pass that you'll be able to stay around in Pacifica? Is this something that's sustainable for you?
Not really.
No.
It's going to be. Where am I going to find a place that I was used to paying for like that? I'm not.
Fresno.
Right. Right. I mean, that's what's ended up happening to so many people. And you know, I think, Larry, your stories is so salient because it's really emblematic of the stories of so many people, you know, who are, you know, folks from the community who like give their all for this community, but who this community, you know, if we can't pass this ordinance, will seem to have turned its back on. Yeah,
exactly. You know, and I share custody with my son, so I'm not going to leave my son, so I'm in a predicament. So we're going to work very hard to get it passed.
So this kind of thing can actually break families up.
Oh, it has. It's happening right now. It's breaking everything up. But personally see it by the work I do out here in Pacifica.
So have there been like a surge in rent increases because of this measure? Is that part of the problem?
When the city council, the reason the rents are rolling back is because when the city council started talking about possibly putting it on the ballot, a lot of rents went up. It was it appeared to be in reaction to that. It went up a lot. We think that some of the real estate organizations advised landlords to do that. It was kind of across the board. A lot of landlords in town. We're going door to door talking to people. There's a lot of buildings where the rents have gone up by huge amounts. One of the problems we have is renters aren't willing to do what we're doing because we can be evicted. You know, if my landlord, I don't even want to go there, but so
there's fear of retaliation, basically.
So we don't have. So renters are very hesitant to be public in any way, or be identified with helping this effort because their housing is on the line.
Right, and that was part of the reason I think that we had that temporary ordinance measure, right? So that was kind of be a freeze to kind of stabilize things, so people didn't have to worry about this between now and November, and then you wouldn't have to have that happen. But weird things happened with that.
Yeah, so the council did pass a temporary moratorium, but the real estate folks brought out-of-town petitioners, and they got signatures and reversed it.
This is a trend we've seen in a lot of places. I mean, as we talked about, the real estate industry and the lobbyists that they've got stand to have some of their profits decrease slightly, and they're going to zealously guard that. And so in cities where there have been grassroots movements, really from the people of the town, to try and rise up and have sensible housing policy like rent stabilization, we've seen the real estate industry throw tons of money to do everything they can to undermine that sort of democratic, groundswell of policy making. And so in Pacifica, like now, and I think there's been 4 cities in the last couple of years where councils have actually passed protections for the residents of a town, and we've had outside real estate interests pour money in and pay signature gatherers from elsewhere to come and swindle the voters.
Yeah, and there was a lot of dishonesty. I observed it myself by the signature gatherers. They were telling people that this was, people that were in favor of rent control, they were saying, you sign this and you'll be able to vote for rent control. And all it was to get rid of
the moratorium,
temporary protections.
Yeah.
And even, the standard line, they say, hey, this is just to put it on the ballot. It wasn't even to put it on the ballot. It's not.
It's on the ballot.
It's already on the ballot. Yeah.
Well, the thing that they were, the specific thing they were signing for was to put something else on the ballot, which the city council didn't put on the ballot, even the realtors in the city council. So it was really just a kind of a ploy. It wasn't really.
What an eye-opener that was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think, again, what I would just encourage your viewers to do is, when you get inundated with all of the mailers and when you get, all of this information on the TV commercials, right, et cetera, look and see who funds it. Just be smart voters, right? Like try and understand who's really supporting the messaging that you're getting.
Right.
I think that's critical to understand, the angle that people may take when they're trying to talk with you.
Right, yeah. Well, it's true. I know our last election, the outside interest paid a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably important for us to kind of keep track of how much money they're spending and kind of make sure that people are aware of that, not after the election, but during the campaign to the degree possible.
Absolutely.
Because I was shocked after the election to find out that like 3/4 of the money was spent by outside real estate interests. But I'm happy to say, though, that the Pacificans didn't let the money influence them as much as you would expect.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that makes me hopeful about the chances of this measure here in Pacifica. Is I think your voters here are pretty independent-minded. I think folks are going to do their research, and I think people really understand that there's a lot of outside real estate money trying to come and take over your town, and you guys have already had to fight that fight.
Yes.
I'm hopeful that people will see, if that same trend holds true, that people will be able to see through it and understand what's really going on and what this measure is really about in terms of preserving our community.
Well, that's great. Well, listen, we only have one more minute, so I want to ask Thursday, since you're part of the Fair Rents for Pacifica, which we should probably put that on the screen again to the website for that. What kind of events are we going to be having as part of the campaign going on?
So we have a website. We have an email list, so if people want to get involved. We have fundraisers. We have a thing happening at Sanchez. We have a thing happening at Shell Dance. We have a fundraiser at El Toro Loco. We have a lot of winters. We have a lot of things going on for fundraisers. And we have a lot of activities in the community where people can get involved in any way they want to.
I understand you're going to be having people knocking door to door.
We are doing that now.
Yeah. So on one end, you got money. The other end, you have human beings.
Well, our budget is quite low, but
but you have it volunteers.
It's largely volunteer driven.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I think our time is up, so I want to say thanks again to Thursday and to Daniel and to Larry for coming along here and trotting our little table here. I think it's the most we've ever had around this table for an interview. And I want to encourage all of you out there to look into this and to learn more. Go to fairrentsforpacifica.org. And I want to thank Luigi's for providing the pizza and you for watching Wavelength. We're not against them, we're for them.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, when I first started the show, I came up with that opening line.